Well, joining us now via Zoom is Petro Burkovskiy, who's a senior fellow at the Kyiv-based Democratic Initiatives Foundation. Thanks very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the program.
Good evening, sir. Yes, I'm very pleased to have the audience.
So we've just heard the Russian foreign minister there saying that he hopes that emotions cool down. How did emotions get so high?
I need to give a little background about this story. That, as you know, that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there were new republics established, among them Russia and Ukraine. And 6 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was an agreement between Russia and Ukraine on friendship and cooperation. And this agreement inscripted the territorial integrity and inviolability of territory of Ukraine. However, after 17 years, in 2014, Russia violated this agreement, occupied and seized the part of the territory of Ukraine, Crimea, unexpectedly, without any kind of warning, and continued the invasion in our eastern parts of Ukraine. So right now, when the Russian Foreign Ministry is saying that Russia has no intention, any hostile intention against Ukraine, we cannot believe that, because 8 years ago, Russia started the war with the country, which it called a partner, an ally, and which it promised to keep to respect the territorial integrity and security. But right now, what we see, and returning back to your question, why the emotions are so high? Because right now, Russia is threatening not only to Ukraine, but also to other neighbors of Ukraine, which are NATO members, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, a security organization in Europe, and in demands from the United States to withdraw all weapons and to withdraw all American troops from these countries. So right now the conflict starts to escalate.
Does Russia have a genuine fear, security fear? Because there was an agreement that once NATO had been set up, that there wouldn't be an expansion eastwards towards Russia. But this seems to be something that NATO is ignoring or choosing to not take seriously. Does Russia have a genuine security concern, or is there no threat to Russia?
Yes, there are talks that there is a security concern, but again, we need to have here a context. The history is that in the early 90s, in the last century, in the early 90s, just in the first years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian leadership actually approved the accession of the former Soviet bloc states to NATO. And right now they try to revise the position of the former Russian leadership, meaning the first president Boris Yeltsin. Right now the second president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, is saying that the collapse of the Soviet Union was tragedy, and that NATO should not expand, and that NATO should stop expanding. So, and they are calling that the NATO expansion makes a threat to Russia. However, another story is that all members of NATO, which joined NATO after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they were trying to preserve their independence because there was a suspicion toward Russia in the region. Russia was an imperial power in the 19th and in the 20th century, and the new republics, they were afraid that when Russia again would be resurgent and would try to regain these territories, including Poland, including Ukraine, all of the countries in the Central and Eastern Europe. So in the view of the minor countries or middle countries like Ukraine or Poland, we see that when the Russians are speaking about security, that means that they speak about their impunity and about their right to decide as a former colonial power and wants to restore its own colonial power in Europe. And you can imagine, so we cannot stand this, and we cannot approve this. And you cannot imagine if United Kingdom sometimes would start saying that it wants to regain power over the South Africa or other African countries. So it's incomprehensible for the European countries too.
So we can understand almost, Ukrainians feeling aggrieved. They've had Crimea annexed, and you have this massive troops on your border. But there must be something in it for the United States, that they would be such a key voice in dealing with Russia and the conflict with Ukraine. What's in it for the United States? Is it to get a foothold as well for themselves close to Russia with having Ukraine as a NATO member?
No, just for you to understand that the United States doesn't want to make Ukraine NATO member, because if any country wants to join NATO, all other existing members of NATO should give an approval. Whereas we do know that Germans are against Ukraine NATO membership, France is against Ukraine NATO membership, and even in the United States, not all parties support Ukraine NATO membership. And that is because the European countries, the big European countries like France and Germany, they don't want to provoke Russia. And Russia, on the other hand, see this position of the big European countries as an invitation to restore its colonial empire in Europe, and took Ukraine or Baltic countries or Poland or some other countries back to its sphere of influence. Therefore, right now, what is at stake for the United States is that it's trying to support its prestige among existing members of NATO. Because other members of NATO, former republics which were under control of Russia, they are afraid that if the West leaves Ukraine at mercy of Russia, the next step would be that the West would leave them at the mercy of Russia, and they will be recaptured by Russia. So this is the context of the whole diplomatic game which is going on right now in Europe.
So we're seeing Lavrov meeting Blinken. What can they resolve? Because the positions that America and Russia have taken seem to be quite hard positions, and I'm not sure where the compromise might be.
Yes, you are. It's true, and you are right that it's very hard to find a compromise. Because Russia is now feeling having a stronger hand. It has an enhanced army. It enjoys high prices on oil and gas, and the main resources of Russian income is income from selling, exporting oil and gas, and Europe depends on Russian gas. Just for you to understand that 40% of European demand in gas is supplied by Russia. So Russia understands these vulnerabilities of key European countries and tries to use it to weaponize it to regain influence in Europe. While these European countries do not want to, again, to become Russian colonies, and they are looking for protection. And the only nuclear power that can provide this kind of protection is the United States. So actually, right now, what we can see is that the United States in the position of a player that should take care of their junior partners. I'm not speaking right now about Ukraine, I'm speaking about other European countries. And if the United States, if we imagine that the United States would make concessions to Russia, that would destroy the European unity, and that can destroy not only NATO but also the European Union. So that is why Americans and Europeans are trying to find a diplomatic way to persuade Russia not to start war and not to restore its sphere of influence in Europe using military force.
So what would actually happen to Ukraine if Putin says to his soldiers, cross the border? What would we see?
There will be a major event, a war, and right now we will see, I can say that it will be a major event the Europe has not experienced since the Second World War. Despite the fact that nobody would fight for us, we will fight on our own. And after 8 years of war, we have an experience, we have the military support from our European partners, and we will defend our country. So it won't be an easy walk for Russia, although it can be disastrous for us. At the same time, the West will impose sanctions on Russia, which will destroy Russian economy. For instance, the United States promised and already announced that they will prohibit selling chips to Russia. And the chips are very important in all modern electronic equipment. So it will leave Russia without modern electronic equipment in a few years. So the consequences for the Europe will be disastrous. And this is obvious for all Europeans. This is obvious for the United States. And therefore, all countries are very at pains to avoid this conflict and to persuade Russia not to start the war. So it's not about the Ukraine. It's not about it's about Ukrainian territory. It's about peace and order in the whole European continent right now. So the stakes are really high for the whole continent of Europe.
I know it's a very difficult question to answer, but how likely is it that Vladimir Putin would risk it all to get these security guarantees that he wants? Are they worth that much destruction?
You see, yes, your question is really good, because it seems like he's asking for security guarantees, but at the same time, if he starts the war, there will be no security at all. The whole architecture of security in Europe will be destroyed, and there is no good chance that he can win this war, and as a victor, he can dictate new conditions of peace and order in Europe. So, therefore, since it is very unpredictable, the results of the war between our country and Russia, the results of the Russian invasion to Ukraine, they are so unpredictable that every sane political leader in Europe tries now to participate in the process of negotiations and tries to influence Vladimir Putin. The United States, the European Union, Germany, France, even Turkey now joined the efforts to avoid the war, to avoid a disaster. So you asked a really tough question, but a really good question, really.
All right. So perhaps as we start to wrap up this conversation, describe for me what the feeling is like inside Ukraine. How are people feeling? Is there genuine fear that, they could see an escalation to war? And is there ever a chance that Ukraine and Russia could ever mend diplomatic relations between the two countries?
Yes. First about the public sentiments. So my center conducts regular opinion polls in Ukraine, and right now we see that up to 30% of the people, they are ready to join armed forces, regular and irregular, in case and will fight Russia on front and in the rear if certain territories would be occupied. And up to 20% of the population would try to help Ukrainian army in a non-military way as volunteers or donors for assistance to the army. A lot of people will try just to survive, especially senior people and children. So we really are facing a very difficult times ahead. And when you asked, is it possible to mend the relation, I think that right now it is impossible because we have in Ukraine a democratic government elected by the people, while in Russia, Russian leader, although he also wins elections, but there is no political opposition. There are no free press, no real political competition, and no real parties in Russia. So it's an authoritarian regime. And Putin sees Ukraine as a danger to his own rule. So actually, the true peace between Ukraine and Russia can be if Russia would again be back on the, would again become a democracy. Right now, it is very unlikely. And the most possible variant of peace is that a temporary truce between Ukraine and Russia. That is the most probable the result, but still it's quite a dangerous and unguaranteed way towards this kind of truce right now.
Petro Burkovskiy, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much indeed. Your insights greatly appreciated. Thank you for your time.
And thank you for your attention.